Guys, it's Sunday lunchtime. It's the day after the night before, and I'm doing a more extended video to reflect on the fights last night. Now, last night I had friends round to watch the fights with me. So, as you guys may or may not have noticed, I did a post-fight video on the Kell Brook Golovkin fight, but it was very, very brief because I was trying to be sociable and not spend 15 minutes recording a video and 15 minutes uploading a video when I had a few friends around to watch the boxing. Let me start by saying that on the whole, I don't believe that last night was an overly good advert for boxing to the casual fan. The main fight was absolutely spectacular, despite some controversy with the stoppage, but the main fight was a great fight. But I'm one of those guys who likes to watch the very first fight to the end, and a few of my friends who wanted to come over were intrigued to see Conor Benn fight, obviously because of the surname. So we sat down and we started watching the boxing at 6 o'clock last night, and we started with Conor Benn and watched all the way through till the end. And Conor Benn provided moments of excitement, but from there, let's be honest, it went downhill. We saw what I can only describe as a pregnant Paul Smith waddling out to the ring for a 6-rounder against some ridiculous opponent who offered nothing. We saw Callum Smith in a woeful mismatch. Even the world title fights, I've got to be honest, I consider myself a hardcore boxing fan. I really struggled to get overly pumped for them. Maybe it's because of the size. Charlie Edwards obviously being in the flyweight division, Haskins being bantamweight, but all of those fighters, Edwards, Casemiro, Hall, Haskins, they're not personalities, they're not individuals, and they don't have styles that get me overly pumped and excited to watch them, and that may be my fault, but I think, if I'm honest, that was reflective of a lot of the people there. And certainly in that Hall Haskins fight, I just didn't feel the style gelled. I felt it was quite dull to watch, and really, if I'm honest, I sat down to watch the fights. You guys know I'm a boxing nut. I was flicking through my Facebook, flicking through my Twitter. It just wasn't a night that caught my interest. There weren't memorable fights. The fights that were competitive were a bit scrappier, and I'd say on the whole it was really forgettable. I guess when you're booking an undercard, you don't know how good and how exciting it's going to be till the night. You can be very lucky with how some fights develop, and maybe Eddie Hearn just got unlucky. But the main event was such that fortunately a lot of that will probably be browsed over, and a lot of it will be forgotten and not really memorised, because the 5 rounds we saw for Golovkin Kell Brook were extremely, extremely competitive, exciting boxing. Now, I predicted Gennady Golovkin to win the fight in the 5th or 6th round by knockout. I said that Kell Brook may have some success early on. Gennady Golovkin may start a bit slow, but in the 3rd and 4th round he'll raise the pace, the writing will be on the wall, and he'll be able to force the stoppage in the 5th and 6th. So I was quite happy with my prediction. Having said that, I must admit, I didn't necessarily see the fight going in the manner that it actually did. Golovkin abandoned the jab. Gennady Golovkin, as we know, is one of the best jabs in world boxing. And when he used it in the Kell Brook fight, he was very effective with it. The jab was such a weapon against Kell Brook. But he wasn't jab heavy. We've seen fights with David Lemieux where everything came off the jab. Last night, for me, Golovkin was very reckless. Maybe it was because he didn't respect Kell Brook. Maybe it's because he didn't respect his power. Maybe it's because he felt the guy was a welterweight. But Golovkin, to me, was like a bull in a china shop. He wanted to run through Kell Brook. From the first round, we saw him, quite uncharacteristically, charging in really with haymakers. I don't think I've seen Golovkin that inaccurate. I don't think I've seen him that raw before. He kind of abandoned technique a bit. and slugged through wide haymakers. Kell Brook, on the other hand, was looking to box. He was looking to box from the outside. He was looking to put together crisp combinations. He was looking to move. He was looking to be evasive. He was looking to be defensively astute. And as a result, this fight had the appearance of Kell Brook being the smarter boxer and Golovkin being the slugger. And Kell Brook impressed me at times in the fight. His head movement and upper body movement was very, very good in this fight. Very good. He made Golovkin miss on numerous occasions. I was really impressed by that. Some of the punches Kell Brook was putting together, particularly the uppercut, were really good. And he was landing decently structured combinations on Golovkin with surprising regularity. Obviously, Kell Brook showed heart of a lion. He showed amazing heart, determination, and he showed some real skills in there. And he probably had more success against Golovkin than any of Golovkin's other opponents. I still feel part of that is because Golovkin kind of just went out with the method to bowl him over, really. I don't think Golovkin really fought his best fight. He looked a bit sloppy, a bit reckless in that, and I think that's probably because, in many ways, he just saw Kell Brook as a welterweight who he'd be able to grind down and run through. And I guess he wanted to put on a show. Maybe he didn't want to stand there and jab, he just wanted to knock out Kell Brook. And to be honest, it looked like he'd go for the knockout in round one with some of the punches he was throwing. So I think Triple G showed some weaknesses in there. I felt he was defensively open, very limited head movement, ate a lot of leather, quite reckless and quite wide and inaccurate with some of his punches. Having said that, I'm not utterly convinced that that's signs of a general weakness in Triple G. I believe he's a fighter who fights the different styles, and I believe that against someone who he perceives as more of a threat, perhaps a genuine middleweight or a super middleweight, maybe we'd see him adopt more of the Lemieux methodology than what we saw last night. But all in all, it led to a fantastic clash that was real exciting. Of the 4 rounds, I either had Kell ahead or a draw. I don't think after 4 you could really construct an argument to say that Golovkin was ahead. For me, and I said this last night in my short post-fight video, had real similarities this fight between the Khan Canelo fight. Real similarities indeed. And in that fight, just like last night, I felt that Kell Brook coming in so heavy and so big was a real negative. A real negative. For me, Kell Brook looked like he was starting to tire from the 3rd round. I noticed the mouth was slightly open. I noticed his defensive movement was slightly more laboured. You know, and that's the other thing. Golovkin, even though it wasn't his most clinical performance, his footwork, his ability to cut down the ring was exceptional. He doesn't do much. He's quite robotic with his footwork, but it's so effective the way he judges the angles. So you've got Kell Brook, who's got, you know, bulging biceps, doing lateral movement, dancing on the back foot around the ring. All of that extra weight told quite quickly on Kell. You know, there was a lot of punch output from both men. Kell Brook was throwing a lot of heavy leather. He was eating a lot of heavy leather. He was moving a lot, and he was doing that with real extra weight. And big biceps, big thighs are not necessary in boxing. You know, sure, it looks good in the mirror if you're taking a selfie in the gym, but you know, for me, those it would have been just like, and I said this with Amir Khan, maybe Kell shouldn't have come in at 160. Maybe he shouldn't have been 176 a month out from the fight. Maybe he should have looked to have done more of a back foot runner's game, and maybe he'd have been better off coming in at 154.5 to do that. I felt the extra weight was a negative. It may have increased his punch resistance slightly, but I think it led to him tiring much more quickly in the fight. And from about the 4th, 5th round, when we saw him getting tired, and obviously he had an eye injury as well. It seemed that happened in the 1st or 2nd round, and you know, clearly he had an injury. But from the 4th, 5th round, we saw him in the corner a bit more. We saw him up against the ropes a bit more, and you just cannot do that against Golovkin. So for me, Kell Brook, I've definitely got to say he's not a middleweight. He looked like the stronger man in there than Gennady Golovkin. He had bigger biceps, he had bigger back. He looked like he could bench press more than Gennady Golovkin. But for me, being a genuine middleweight is about your frame. Anyone can put on a stone of fat. Anyone can put on a stone of muscle, do a load of bicep curls, do a load of bench press. It's not hard. And for me, that's what Kell Brook has done. But the fact remains, he's not got a middleweight frame. So he's coming into the ring at 160 with this artificial and unnecessary muscle. I do a lot of long distance running, you know, and I do lift a bit of weights, and it's so much harder to go out and do cardio for an hour if you're a stone heavier. So much harder. I'm not saying Kell Brook's fat or out of shape or anything like that, but the amount of physical exertion he needed to put in, I felt he needed to be light and lean and not have the unnecessary weight, and I think that was a big negative. For me, 154 seems to be the sensible option for Kell Brook after this fight, and that's where I see his future. He emerges from the fight having lost his unbeaten record, but with a huge amount of credit, and his popularity and profile will probably be at an all-time high. 154, it's not the glamour division. It's not. You know, at 147, you've got huge names: Pacquiao, Keith Thurman, those sort of guys. At 160, you've got Golovkin, Eubank. 154, you know, Charlo, Lara, Andrade. There's not the same risk-reward there. They're not the superstar names. But perhaps we could see him against Liam Smith. Perhaps we could see Brook against Canelo. You know, I know Canelo's saying he's going up to middleweight, but it'd be interesting to see where he turns up at. And there's some potential for him at 154. At 160, I know Brook showed an excellent chin in one sense not to go down, but I felt like Golovkin was hurting him. I felt like the punches were taking a toll on Brook. And as much as Brook would disagree with the following statement, and the commentators and Sky would obviously disagree, I don't think Brook was hurting Golovkin. He was catching Golovkin, he was punching him with nice shots. I didn't see Golovkin hurt. I didn't see him staggered. I didn't see him rocked at any stage. Golovkin's got a good chin. Golovkin's got a genuine middleweight frame. And for me, with Brook, I'm not saying he's a light puncher, but fighting a 160 guy like Golovkin, it was always a bit of a crazy suggestion that he was going to be having the same effect as he was when he was hitting small 147 guys like Jojo Dan and Frankie Gavin. Sure, Kell may hit slightly harder at 160 than he does at 147, but the opponents are so much bigger and tougher and more durable that you need to hit a hell of a lot harder to get the same results, especially against an opponent with a proven chin like Triple G. So Kell Brook did well. He did well, but fundamentally, he was outgunned. He proved he wasn't a middleweight to my mind. And I think that despite the immense heart and chin he showed, he doesn't have the punch resistance or the power at 160 to beat a guy like Golovkin. Last night, my initial instinct was that the stoppage was early. Having watched the fight back, having reflected on it, and obviously having the understanding that his trainer, Ingle, will be aware of the injury he had sustained, I don't think it was early. I actually think Kell Brook would have been knocked unconscious later in the 5th round, or certainly in the 6th round. Golovkin was starting to swarm all over him. Golovkin was coming on strong. More and more regularly, Kell Brook's back was against the ropes. More and more regularly, Golovkin was positioning him in the corner and unloading heavy lever. For me, the writing was on the wall. Watching that fight back, Kell Brook's chance to win the fight died in that 5th round. I didn't see him coming back from that. And I think the stoppage was right. I think Kell Brook would have been knocked out very badly if he had continued. So I applaud the stoppage. And Kell Brook emerges from the fight with immense credit. He put in a real likeable performance, and it's going to raise his profile. He'll lose nothing in this defeat. This defeat will actually benefit his profile and his career as far as I'm concerned. As for Golovkin, a lot of people sensing weakness in Golovkin after that fight. My real perception is that Golovkin changed his style for the opponent, and maybe he misjudged that slightly. Maybe he thought he'd run through Kell Brook, and he found it more difficult than anticipated. Sorry, girlfriend's mug. But, yeah. So a lot of people are asking me, would Canelo now beat Golovkin? Would Eubank Jr. now beat Golovkin? My answer to that is no. I don't think we see the same Golovkin in those fights that we saw in the Kell Brook fight. So if Golovkin came out and fought the exact same fight he did last night against Kell Brook, then yeah, he could easily get beaten. But would we see him that reckless, that wide, that open defensively against a genuine middleweight? I don't think so. I think we'd see him adopt the blueprint he set in that Lemieux fight. So I don't think, realistically, that there's anyone I'd pick to beat him at 160. But I'll tell you a man I would pick to beat him, and I would pick to beat him with great certainty. James DeGale. Golovkin is a small guy at 160. He's got a genuine middleweight's frame. And I believe 160 is the right weight class for him. But he's a small guy for 160. DeGale, whose nickname is Chunky, is a big guy for 168. And at 168, you're getting to the stage where you're dealing with big guys. You're getting to the stage where you're dealing with guys who are 6 foot. You're getting to the stage where you're dealing with guys who walk around at 14 stone. You're talking about guys who are bigger than average. You're talking about guys who potentially would play centre half if they were playing football, you know. And Golovkin, for me, just like Kell Brook, didn't carry the same power and punch resistance at 160. It's unclear to me whether Golovkin would carry the same power and punch resistance up to 168. 160 to 168 is a big gap. It's a fair old gap. And, you know, we saw Golovkin at 162 7 days out before the fight. He'd be fighting opponents coming into the ring in the 180s. And a guy like James DeGale, who can combine outside and inside, who can maybe switch hit, who can maybe big man you up close, who can throw all sorts of awkward punches from strange angles. I think Golovkin's beatable at 168. But that's not a criticism of Golovkin, because most fighters would be beatable at the weight class above them. You know, I like Sergei Kovalev. Would I necessarily pick him to beat Usyk at cruiserweight? Probably not. I like Keith Thurman. Would I expect him to beat Andrade at 154? Probably not. So it's not a criticism of Golovkin to say he'd probably lose to the top guy in the weight division above him. But if I was Golovkin's management team, I'd accept that I've got a small middleweight on my hands, and I wouldn't necessarily be looking at 168. For me, don't expect Golovkin to fight the same fight he fought against Kell Brook against Eubank Jr. or Danny Jacobs or even Billy Joe Saunders. Expect a more technically minded, restrained Golovkin. And with that versatility in his locker, at this point I favour him over all at 160. Let me know your thoughts, people. Keen to hear your thoughts on the fight, the future for both guys. How does Golovkin do against Eubank? How does Golovkin do against Canelo? Where does Kell Brook go from here? Give me your thoughts on the undercard as a whole and the night as a whole. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please take the time to hit the thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, do subscribe. And really appreciate everyone who's taken the time to tune in. Thanks, guys.